What happens when the galaxy's most feared empire decides to break a human spirit by unleashing their ultimate biological weapon? They're about to discover that humans don't just survive, they thrive in ways that will reshape everything they thought they knew about the food chain. In the cold vacuum of space, where civilizations rise and fall on the edge of a plasma blade, one truth echoes across the stars: never corner a species that evolved alongside apex predators. The Kytherian Empire learned this lesson the hard way when they captured Dr. Sarah Chan, thinking they held just another fragile human scientist. They were wrong. What unfolds next will become legend among the stars, a tale whispered in cantinas across 1,000 worlds about the day the galaxy's apex predators met something even deadlier. Something that didn't just hunt for survival, but formed bonds that could shatter empires. Prepare yourself for a story where loyalty runs deeper than blood, where intelligence trumps brute force, and where the most dangerous predator in the universe might just be the one that learned to love. Dr. Sarah Chan pressed her palm against the cold metal wall of her prison cell, feeling the subtle vibrations of the massive ship's engines. 3 weeks had passed since the Kytherian Empire captured her research vessel near the Proxima Centauri station. 3 weeks of interrogations, mind probes, and psychological warfare designed to break her spirit and extract the location of Earth's hidden military installations. They had failed spectacularly. Sarah ran her fingers through her dark hair, noting how it had grown longer during her captivity. The Kytherians were methodical in their cruelty, but they made one critical error: they assumed human fragility translated to weakness. Her captors stood nearly 8 feet tall, with chitinous exoskeletons that could deflect small arms fire and mandibles capable of crushing steel. To them, humans appeared soft, vulnerable, and easily broken. The cell door hissed open, revealing Commander Zefix, the Kytherian officer responsible for her interrogation. His compound eyes glittered with what Sarah had learned to recognize as anticipation. Behind him, 2 guards flanked a hovering transport cage that pulsed with energy fields. Dr. Chen, Zefix said, his translator rendering his clicking speech into perfect English. Your resistance has been most entertaining, but I fear our patience grows thin. Today, we introduce you to something special. Sarah remained seated on her narrow bunk, meeting his gaze without flinching. Let me guess, another mind probe? More neural inhibitors? You've tried everything in your arsenal, Commander. What makes you think today will be different? Zefix's mandibles clicked in what she recognized as amusement. Because today, we stop trying to break your mind. Instead, we'll let our deadliest predator break your body. The guards activated the transport cage, and Sarah found herself encased in crackling energy. The field lifted her effortlessly, carrying her through the ship's corridors. She memorized every turn, every junction, every weakness in the vessel's design. Her training at the academy had been thorough. Even in captivity, a human never stopped gathering intelligence. They passed through sections of the ship she had never seen before. The walls grew more organic in appearance, with strange growths and bioluminescent patches that pulsed with alien life. The air grew thicker, humid with an almost tropical intensity that made her skin prickle with moisture. Welcome to our biological research section, Zefix explained as they moved deeper into the ship's bowels. Here, we cultivate and study the galaxy's most dangerous predators. Creatures that have evolved on worlds where survival requires perfect killing efficiency. They entered a vast chamber filled with containment units of various sizes. Through transparent barriers, Sarah glimpsed nightmarish creatures that defied easy description. One enclosure held something resembling a cross between a spider and a wolf, with metallic fangs that dripped acid. Another contained a serpentine creature whose scales shifted color in hypnotic patterns designed to paralyze prey. But it was the largest enclosure that drew her attention. At least 15 meters wide and equally tall, it contained what appeared to be a miniature ecosystem. Dense vegetation created a jungle-like environment, with twisted trees and hanging vines that moved with predatory intent. Somewhere within that artificial wilderness lurked whatever the Kytherians considered their ultimate biological weapon. Magnificent, isn't it? Zefix gestured toward the massive enclosure. We call it the Apex Arena. Inside dwells a creature we discovered on Kepler 442b, a world where the entire ecosystem exists in perfect predatory balance. The dominant species there evolved not just to hunt, but to psychologically dominate their prey before consumption. They are patient, intelligent, and absolutely merciless. The transport cage carried Sarah to a platform overlooking the enclosure. Below, technicians worked at control panels, their movements quick and nervous. Sarah noted their behavior. Whatever lived in that artificial jungle frightened even the Kytherians. The creature we call the Shadow Maw, Zephyx continued, represents the pinnacle of predatory evolution. It possesses chameleonic abilities that render it nearly invisible, enhanced sensory organs that can detect fear pheromones from vast distances, and, most importantly, a predatory intelligence that rivals our own. It doesn't simply kill, it studies its prey, learns their weaknesses, and then systematically dismantles their will to resist. Sarah studied the enclosure carefully. The vegetation was dense, but she could make out pathways and clearings. More importantly, she noticed the subtle signs of habitation: scratched trees, disturbed undergrowth, and what appeared to be territorial markings. "You're going to feed me to your pet monster," she said matter-of-factly. "Feed you?" Zephyx's mandibles clicked rapidly in what she now recognized as laughter. "Oh no, Dr. Chen. That would be far too quick. The Shadow Maw doesn't simply consume its prey. It toys with them first, breaking them psychologically before delivering the final blow. You see, we've learned that terror is a far more effective interrogation tool than any technology." The transport cage began its descent into the enclosure. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but not with fear, with excitement. The Kytherians had just made their second critical error. They assumed that placing her in mortal danger would break her spirit, but they didn't understand human nature at its core. Humans didn't just survive in dangerous environments, they thrived in them. As the cage touched down in a small clearing, Sarah took careful note of her surroundings. The air was thick with humidity and the scent of rich earth. Insects buzzed among exotic flowers, and small creatures rustled in the underbrush. It was, she realized, remarkably similar to the Amazon rainforest where she had spent 2 years conducting xenobiology research. The energy field dissipated, leaving her standing free in the artificial jungle. Above, she could see Zephyx and his technicians observing from behind protective barriers. The entire enclosure was undoubtedly monitored by sensors and cameras, turning her impending struggle into entertainment. Sarah knelt and touched the soil. It was real earth, not synthetic matter. The vegetation was genuine as well alien, but following familiar biological principles. The Kytherians had essentially created a perfect hunting ground for their apex predator, but they had also created something else, a survival environment where her human adaptability could flourish. A soft rustling in the nearby foliage caught her attention. Something was moving through the undergrowth with deliberate stealth. Sarah remained perfectly still, using her peripheral vision to track the disturbance. Whatever was out there was large, probably twice her size, and it was circling her position. The Shadow Maw was beginning its hunt. Sarah smiled, remembering her grandfather's words from her childhood. He had been a tracker in the Canadian wilderness, teaching her that the difference between predator and prey often came down to mindset. "Never run from a predator unless you're absolutely certain you can escape," he had told her. "Most of the time, you're better off making yourself a problem they don't want to deal with." She began to move through the jungle with practiced ease, her bare feet finding purchase on the soft earth. The Academy's survival training had been comprehensive, covering dozens of alien environments. More importantly, her childhood in the Pacific Northwest had taught her to read forests the way others read books. Behind her, something large crashed through the underbrush. The Shadow Maw was no longer bothering with stealth. It wanted her to know it was coming, to feel the fear that its presence was supposed to inspire. Sarah could almost feel Zephyx's anticipation from above. He expected her to panic, to run blindly through the jungle until exhaustion made her an easy target. Instead, she found a stream running through the enclosure and began following it upstream. Water meant life, and life meant resources. More importantly, it meant options. The stream led to a small waterfall cascading from artificial rocks. Behind the falling water, Sarah discovered what she had hoped to find: a shallow cave carved into the enclosure's wall. It wasn't large, but it was defensible, with only one entrance and solid walls on 3 sides. As she explored the cave, her fingers found something unexpected: scratch marks in the stone, but not from claws. These marks were too precise, too deliberate. They formed patterns, almost like primitive writing. Sarah realized with growing excitement that she wasn't the first intelligent being placed in this enclosure. The Shadow Maw had previous victims, and at least one of them had been smart enough to leave messages. The scratches told a story. Previous prey had discovered that the Shadow Maw was indeed intelligent, but intelligence was also its weakness. The creature was curious about its victims, often observing them for extended periods before attacking. That curiosity could be exploited. A low growl echoed through the cave, coming from the waterfall entrance. The Shadow Maw had found her hiding spot, but it wasn't attacking immediately. Instead, Sarah could sense it watching her, studying her reactions, trying to understand this new type of prey that didn't behave according to its expectations. Sarah settled into a comfortable position and began to speak in a clear, calm voice. "Hello there," she said, addressing the invisible presence beyond the waterfall. "I know you're listening. I know you're intelligent enough to understand that I'm different from whatever you've hunted before." The growling stopped abruptly. "That's right," Sarah continued, her voice taking on the tone she used when addressing her research subjects. "I'm not prey, and you're not just a predator. You're a specimen, just like me. We're both prisoners in this artificial environment, performing for an audience that sees us as nothing more than entertainment." A shadow moved across the waterfall, large, fluid, and definitely not human. "The question is," Sarah said, reaching slowly into her jacket pocket, "do you want to remain a performing animal for the rest of your life, or would you prefer to remind these Kytherians why apex predators shouldn't be caged?" From her pocket, she withdrew the one item her captors had overlooked during their searches, a simple whistle made from polished bone. It had been a gift from her grandfather, carved from the antler of an elk he had tracked for 3 days through the British Columbia wilderness. Sarah raised the whistle to her lips and blew 3 sharp notes, a pattern her grandfather had taught her for calling wolves. The sound echoed through the cave and out into the jungle beyond. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, from somewhere impossibly distant, came an answering call. Not from within the enclosure, but from beyond it. From outside the ship itself. The Shadow Maw's growl changed pitch, becoming confused and uncertain. "That's right," Sarah said softly, watching the shadow beyond the waterfall shift restlessly. "I'm not alone either. And my pack doesn't abandon its members." Above them, alarms began to wail throughout the Kytherian ship. Sarah smiled grimly as she recognized the particular pattern. It was the alert for incoming vessels. Multiple vessels. The rescue fleet had finally arrived. The Shadow Maw pushed through the waterfall, revealing itself for the first time. It was magnificent and terrifying, a creature of flowing darkness with eyes like burning stars and claws that could rend steel. But, in those alien eyes, Sarah saw something the Kytherians had missed: loneliness. "You know what I think," she said, meeting the creature's gaze without fear. "I think you're tired of being their entertainment. I think you'd like to see what chaos looks like when the prey starts hunting the hunter." The Shadow Maw tilted its massive head, considering her words. Then, slowly, it settled onto its haunches and made a sound that was almost like purring. "Good," Sarah said, standing and brushing dirt from her clothes. "Because we're about to show these Kytherians exactly why humans became the galaxy's apex predator. And you're going to help me do it." Above them, the alarms grew louder as explosions echoed through the ship's hull. The rescue had become an assault, and Dr. Sarah Chen was about to transform from prisoner to predator. The real hunt was just beginning. The ship shuddered as another explosion rocked the Kytherian vessel, sending tremors through the artificial jungle. Sarah maintained eye contact with the Shadow Maw, noting how its bioluminescent patches pulsed in rhythm with the emergency lighting above. The creature was more than intelligent, it was calculating, measuring the changing dynamics of their situation. Through the cave's waterfall entrance, the sound of running feet and panicked clicking reached them. The Kytherians were scrambling to respond to the assault, their attention diverted from the entertainment they had planned. Sarah realized this was the perfect opportunity to test her theory about the creature before her. "They never gave you a real name, did they?" she asked softly, watching the Shadow Maw's reaction. "Just called you their biological weapon, their perfect predator. But you're not a weapon, you're a being with your own thoughts, your own desires." The creature made a low rumbling sound that seemed almost contemplative. Its massive head turned toward the waterfall as more explosions echoed through the ship's structure. When it looked back at Sarah, she saw something remarkable in its alien eyes: recognition. "You understand what's happening," she continued, taking a careful step closer. "This ship is under attack. Your captors are distracted, vulnerable. And you know as well as I do that predators strike when their enemies are weakest." The Shadow Maw rose to its full height, towering over Sarah's small frame. But, instead of the threatening posture she expected, the creature lowered its massive head until they were at eye level. Its nostrils flared as it scented her, and Sarah remained perfectly still, letting it complete its assessment. What happened next defied everything the Kytherians believed about both species. The shadow maw gently pressed its forehead against hers. The contact was brief but profound. Through some form of limited telepathic connection, Sarah felt the creature's emotions, loneliness, rage, and, beneath it all, a desperate hunger for genuine companionship. The Kytherians had isolated it for so long that it had forgotten what kinship felt like. When they separated, Sarah smiled. "You're not their weapon anymore. You're my partner. What do you say we remind these kidnappers why they should never cage apex predators?" The response was immediate and decisive. The shadow maw's bioluminescent patches flared bright blue, and it released a roar that shook the cave walls. But this wasn't a roar of aggression, it was a declaration of alliance. "I'm going to call you Umbra," Sarah said, choosing the Latin word for shadow. "It suits you better than their designation." Umbra's head bobbed once in what was unmistakably a nod of agreement. Another explosion, closer this time, sent debris raining into the waterfall pool. The rescue operation was becoming increasingly violent, and Sarah knew they needed to move quickly. The Kytherians would soon realize that keeping prisoners in a biological containment area during a battle was a tactical mistake. "Can you show me the way out of this enclosure?" she asked Umbra. The massive creature moved with surprising grace, leading her through the waterfall and into the jungle beyond. As they traveled, Sarah noticed that Umbra's camouflage abilities were even more sophisticated than Zethix had described. The creature could alter not just its coloration but its apparent texture, making it blend seamlessly with its surroundings. They reached a section of the enclosure's wall that looked identical to every other part, but Umbra pressed against a specific point with one massive claw. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a maintenance corridor beyond. "You've been planning an escape for some time," Sarah observed with admiration. "How long have you known about this exit?" Umbra made a series of soft clicks that somehow conveyed the concept of long time along with frustration and patience. Sarah began to understand that this creature had been systematically studying its prison for cycles, waiting for the right opportunity to escape. They emerged from the maintenance corridor into the ship's primary service tunnel system. The passages were designed for Kytherian anatomy, too tall for Sarah but perfectly sized for Umbra. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the metallic walls, and the air hummed with the vibration of combat systems engaging their attackers. "We need to reach the detention levels," Sarah explained as they moved through the tunnels. "There are likely other prisoners aboard this ship, and I won't leave without them." Umbra paused at a junction, its head tilted as if listening to sounds beyond human perception. Then, it gestured with one claw toward a passage leading upward. When Sarah hesitated, the creature made a series of soft vocalizations that clearly meant "trust me." The tunnel led to a ventilation shaft that opened into the ship's central computer core. Through the grating, Sarah could see rows of quantum processors and data storage units humming with activity. But, more importantly, she could see the ship's internal schematics displayed on monitoring screens. "Perfect," she whispered, studying the layout. "The detention center is 3 levels down, but there's something else we need to consider." The tactical displays showed the battle raging outside. 5 human vessels had surrounded the Kytherian ship, but they were being careful to avoid causing catastrophic damage. They knew Sarah was aboard and were trying to disable rather than destroy the vessel. "They're holding back because of me," Sarah realized. "But that gives the Kytherians an advantage. We need to even the odds." She pointed to a section of the ship's schematic showing the primary weapons array. "If we can disable their main armaments, the rescue fleet can move in safely." Umbra studied the display with obvious intelligence, its eyes tracking the different systems and their interconnections. Then, it looked at Sarah and made a questioning sound. "You want to know if I'm serious about taking on an entire Kytherian warship with just the 2 of us?" Sarah interpreted. "The answer is absolutely yes. My people have a saying, never underestimate what humans can accomplish when properly motivated." They made their way through the ship's service passages, avoiding the main corridors where Kytherian soldiers were rushing to battle stations. Umbra's knowledge of the vessel's layout proved invaluable. The creature had clearly spent its captivity memorizing every passage and vent in its domain. As they traveled, Sarah began to understand the true scope of Umbra's intelligence. The creature didn't just navigate by memory, it was actively calculating their route to avoid patrol patterns and sensor sweeps. More than that, it was anticipating where the Kytherians would concentrate their defenses and finding alternate approaches. They reached the weapons control center through an air circulation shaft that emerged behind the primary console banks. Through the grating, Sarah could see 6 Kytherian technicians working frantically to coordinate the ship's defensive systems. Their attention was focused entirely on the external threat. None of them considered that danger might come from within. "Wait for my signal," Sarah whispered to Umbra. She carefully removed the ventilation grating and slipped into the control room. Her years of xenobiology research had required her to learn basic Kytherian technology interfaces, and she quickly identified the primary weapons control console. Working with practiced efficiency, Sarah began introducing cascade failures into the targeting systems. It wasn't enough to simply disable the weapons. She needed to create system-wide malfunctions that would keep the Kytherians occupied for hours. One of the technicians noticed her presence and turned with a startled exclamation. Before he could raise an alarm, Umbra burst through the ventilation shaft with predatory grace. The massive creature didn't attack the Kytherians. Instead, it positioned itself between them and the exit while releasing a low, menacing growl that promised violence if they interfered. The technicians froze in terror, their compound eyes fixed on the apex predator that had somehow escaped containment. Sarah continued her sabotage work, introducing viral routines into the ship's defensive systems while Umbra maintained psychological dominance over their potential threats. "There," Sarah said, completing her work at the weapons console. "Their primary armaments are offline, and it will take hours to restore functionality." Through the room's main view screen, they could see the immediate results of her sabotage. The Kytherian ship's weapons fell silent, and the human rescue fleet began moving closer. But, instead of pressing their attack, the human ships took defensive positions around the Kytherian vessel. "They're waiting for a signal from me," Sarah realized. Standard rescue protocol: establish contact before boarding. She activated the room's communications console, setting it to broadcast on standard human frequencies. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen aboard the Kytherian vessel. I am alive and mobile within the ship. Be advised that I am not alone and will be securing other prisoners before extraction." The response came immediately. "Sarah, this is Captain Rodriguez aboard the UES Resilient. We have you on sensors. What's your status?" "Fully operational and accompanied by a new ally," Sarah replied, glancing at Umbra, who was still maintaining his intimidating watch over the Kytherian technicians. "Request permission to complete prisoner rescue before extraction." "Negative, Dr. Chen. We have orders to extract you immediately. The Kytherian reinforcements will arrive within the hour." Sarah considered this information carefully. Reinforcements meant the window of opportunity was closing rapidly. But she also knew that leaving other prisoners behind violated everything she believed about human responsibility. "Captain, I need 15 minutes to reach the detention level and evacuate any other prisoners. After that, you can extract everyone together." There was a pause before Rodriguez responded. "Understood, Doctor. You have 15 minutes. After that, we're coming aboard with or without your permission." Sarah ended the communication and turned to find Umbra watching her intently. The creature had clearly understood the conversation's implications. Their escape window was limited. "We need to move fast," she told her unlikely partner. "Can you handle these technicians while I find the quickest route to detention?" Umbra's response was to settle into a comfortable position directly in front of the room's only exit. Its message was clear: none of the Kytherians would be leaving until Sarah completed her mission. Using the ship's internal sensors, Sarah located the detention center and identified 7 life signs in the holding cells. The recognition patterns indicated 5 humans and 2 members of species she didn't recognize, probably other captured researchers or diplomatic personnel. 7 prisoners total, she informed Umbra. "The route will take us through 3 security checkpoints, and we'll need to override at least 2 magnetic containment systems." Umbra stood and moved to the ventilation shaft, clearly ready to depart. But, before leaving, the creature did something unexpected. It looked directly at each of the Kytherian technicians and made a soft, almost gentle sound. The message was unmistakable: stay here and remain quiet, and you will not be harmed. As they prepared to leave the weapons control room, Sarah realized something profound about her relationship with Umbra. They weren't just temporary allies united by circumstance, they had formed the kind of pact bond that made humans and their companion species so formidable throughout the galaxy. The Kytherians had tried to break her by unleashing their deadliest predator. Instead, they had given her exactly what she needed, a partner who understood that true strength came not from solitary dominance, but from collaborative intelligence. Together, they headed toward the detention center, ready to demonstrate why the galaxy's apex predators had always been those who fought as one. The detention center lay 3 levels below the weapons control room, accessible through a maze of corridors that buzzed with increased Kytherian activity. Sarah and Umbra moved through the service tunnels like ghosts, the creature's natural stealth abilities complemented by Sarah's knowledge of Kytherian behavioral patterns. Through ventilation grates, they could observe the ship's crew responding to the crisis. Soldiers rushed toward battle stations while technicians worked frantically to restore damaged systems. The chaos provided perfect cover for their infiltration, but Sarah knew their 15-minute window was rapidly shrinking. "First checkpoint ahead," Sarah whispered, studying the corridor through a maintenance panel. 2 Kytherian guards stood beside a security scanner, their attention focused on monitoring internal sensors for signs of boarding parties. They hadn't considered that the threat might already be inside their ship. Umbra's bioluminescent patches dimmed to almost nothing, rendering the creature nearly invisible in the tunnel's shadows. Sarah watched in fascination as her partner's camouflage abilities adapted to match the metallic surfaces around them. The effect was so perfect that even knowing where to look, she could barely make out the massive creature's outline. "Psychological dominance," she murmured, remembering her xenobiology training. "The most effective predators don't need to kill, they just need to convince their targets that resistance is futile." Sarah removed the maintenance panel with practiced quiet and dropped into the corridor behind the guards. Before they could react to her presence, Umbra flowed out of the tunnel like living shadow, materializing between the Kytherians and their weapon stations. The guards' reaction was immediate and predictable. Their compound eyes widened in terror as they found themselves face to face with their ship's most feared biological weapon. One of them reached for his communication device, but Umbra's massive head turned toward him with predatory focus. "I wouldn't," Sarah advised calmly. "My friend here has very strong opinions about people who try to call for help." The Kytherian's hand froze inches from his communicator. Umbra made a low rumbling sound that vibrated through the deck plates, not quite a growl, but unmistakably threatening. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah continued, approaching the security console. "You're going to stand perfectly still while I override your checkpoint systems. If you cooperate, no one gets hurt. If you try to interfere, well..." She gestured toward Umbra, whose eyes were now glowing with soft blue light. The guards remained motionless as Sarah worked on their security systems. The Kytherian encryption was sophisticated but followed predictable patterns based on their mathematical preferences. Within minutes, she had gained access to the detention center's control protocols. 7 prisoners confirmed, she reported to Umbra while studying the security displays. 5 humans in standard containment cells, and 2 others in specialized environmental chambers. One appears to be from a high-gravity world, the other requires a methane atmosphere. Umbra moved closer to examine the displays, its intelligence clearly evident in how it studied the layout and security measures. The creature made a series of soft clicks that Sarah was beginning to interpret as questions or suggestions. "You're right," she agreed. "The environmental chambers will be the most challenging to evacuate. We'll need portable life support for both aliens, and the high-gravity being will require mobility assistance." She accessed the detention center's inventory systems and found what she needed: emergency evacuation suits designed for various alien physiologies. The Kytherians, for all their cruelty, maintained their prisoners in survivable conditions. It was a practical necessity rather than compassion, but it would serve Sarah's purposes. The second checkpoint proved even easier to bypass. Umbra's reputation had apparently spread through the ship's communication networks, and the guards abandoned their posts when they detected the creature's approach. Sarah began to understand why the Kytherians had been so confident in their biological weapon. Few beings in the galaxy could maintain composure when confronted by an apex predator of Umbra's caliber. They reached the detention center's main entrance without further resistance. The heavy blast doors were sealed with multiple security protocols, but Sarah's earlier infiltration of the ship systems had given her administrative access to most internal controls. "Stand back," she told Umbra as she initiated the opening sequence. "The prisoners inside might react badly to seeing you at first." The blast doors cycled open, revealing a sterile corridor lined with containment cells. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red shadows, and the air recycling systems hummed with increased activity. Sarah could hear voices from within the cells, humans calling out in various languages, asking what was happening. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, she announced loudly enough for all the prisoners to hear. I'm here to evacuate everyone. Please remain calm and follow my instructions exactly. The first cell contained Dr. Marcus Webb, a xenoarchaeologist whose research vessel had been captured near the Rigel system. Sarah recognized him from Academy conferences, a brilliant researcher with expertise in ancient alien civilizations. Sarah? Marcus stared at her in disbelief as his cell door opened. How did you? His words died as he noticed Umbra standing behind her, the creature's massive form barely fitting in the corridor. Long story, Sarah replied quickly. Right now, we need to evacuate 7 beings in 13 minutes. Are you injured? No, but, Dr. Yamato in Cell 3 has a broken arm, and Lieutenant Morrison in Cell 5 has been drugged with some kind of neural suppressant. Sarah's jaw tightened with anger. The Kytherians' interrogation techniques had left their marks on the human prisoners. Can they travel? With help, yes. Working efficiently, Sarah and Marcus released the remaining human prisoners while Umbra maintained watch at the corridor entrance. Dr. Yamato was indeed injured but mobile, while Lieutenant Morrison required assistance walking due to the drugs affecting his balance and coordination. Who's our large friend? Morrison asked groggily, squinting at Umbra through the neural suppressants clouding his vision. The creature the Kytherians thought would break me, Sarah replied. Instead, he chose to join our cause. The 2 alien prisoners required more complex extraction procedures. The high-gravity being, a member of the Corvin species, needed a mobility harness to function in standard gravity. The methane-breathing alien required a full environmental suit to survive in the ship's oxygen-rich atmosphere. This is going to take longer than expected, Marcus observed as they worked to properly equip the alien prisoners. Then, we make time, Sarah replied grimly. She activated her communicator to contact the rescue fleet. Captain Rodriguez, this is Dr. Chen. I need an additional 5 minutes to complete prisoner evacuation. Negative, Doctor. Kytherian reinforcements are approaching our position. We need to begin extraction immediately. Sarah considered their options quickly. The human prisoners could move immediately, but the aliens needed more time to properly seal their life support systems. Leaving them behind was unacceptable, but endangering the entire rescue operation was equally problematic. It was Umbra who provided the solution. The massive creature approached the methane-breathing alien's containment chamber and began making a series of complex vocalizations. To Sarah's amazement, the alien responded with similar sounds. They were communicating directly. You can understand each other? Sarah asked. Umbra nodded and continued its conversation with the alien prisoner. After a few moments, the creature turned to Sarah and made a series of gestures that clearly indicated faster way and trust me. The alien prisoner, who Sarah now realized was far more intelligent than his insectoid appearance suggested, began rapidly donning his environmental suit with practiced efficiency. Whatever Umbra had communicated had motivated him to move with urgent purpose. Similarly, the Corvin prisoner began adjusting his mobility harness without waiting for assistance. It seemed Umbra had conveyed the urgency of their situation in terms all the prisoners could understand. How did you know they were intelligent? Sarah asked her partner as the prisoners completed their preparations. Umbra's response was a complex series of sounds and gestures that conveyed the concept of recognizing similar minds. The creature had understood from the beginning that these weren't just random captives, they were researchers and explorers, beings whose intelligence and curiosity made them kindred spirits. With all 7 prisoners mobile and equipped, their group moved toward the detention center's exit. But, as they reached the main corridor, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Not the general alert they had been hearing, but something far more urgent, a proximity warning indicating incoming vessels. The reinforcements have arrived early, Sarah realized. We need to reach the extraction point now. Their route to the ship's docking bay led through the vessel's central hub, where multiple corridors converged around the main computer core. As they approached this junction, the sound of running feet and clicking mandibles echoed from multiple directions. Kytherian soldiers were converging on their position. They've figured out where we are, Marcus observed grimly. Sarah looked at their group, 7 newly freed prisoners, most injured or impaired, accompanied by 1 human researcher and a creature the Kytherians still considered their property. Under normal circumstances, they would be hopelessly outnumbered. But, as she watched Umbra assess their tactical situation, Sarah realized these weren't normal circumstances. They weren't just escapees anymore, they were a pack, and Umbra understood pack dynamics in ways that went beyond simple cooperation. The creature positioned itself at the corridor junction and released a roar that shook the entire ship section. The sound was unlike anything Sarah had heard before, not just a challenge, but a declaration of territorial dominance that resonated through the ship's hull. The approaching footsteps stopped abruptly. "They remember who they're dealing with," Sarah said with grim satisfaction. "But they'll overcome their fears soon enough. We need to keep moving." As they entered the central hub, Sarah could see Kytherian soldiers gathering at the far ends of each corridor, their weapons trained on the junction but their aim uncertain. They were afraid to fire while Umbra was present. The creature's value to their empire was too great to risk accidental destruction. "They won't shoot while you're here," Sarah told her partner. "But they'll try to isolate you from the rest of us." Umbra's response was to position itself protectively around the group of prisoners, its massive form serving as a living shield. The creature's bioluminescent patches began pulsing in complex patterns, not random light displays, but deliberate communication. Sarah realized with growing excitement that Umbra was broadcasting to the ship's other biological specimens. Throughout the vessel, captured creatures were responding to their apex predators' call for assistance. The liberation had become a revolution, and the Kytherians were about to learn why containing intelligent predators was the galaxy's most dangerous mistake. The ship's biological research section erupted into chaos as Umbra's call echoed through the vessel's containment systems. Sarah watched in fascination as her partner's bioluminescent patterns triggered responses from dozens of captured creatures throughout the ship. The Kytherians had unknowingly created a perfect storm. Their collection of galactic predators was about to become a coordinated uprising. Through the central hub's viewports, flashes of light indicated that the battle outside had intensified. Kytherian reinforcements engaged the human rescue fleet while Captain Rodriguez's forces struggled to maintain their defensive positions. The window for extraction was rapidly closing, but Sarah realized they no longer needed to reach the docking bay. The extraction point was coming to them. Dr. Chen, Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through her communicator, "We're detecting massive system failures throughout the Kytherian vessel. What's your status?" "We've liberated all prisoners and acquired significant local assets," Sarah replied, watching as Umbra continued its complex communication with the ship's other captives. "Be advised that we're implementing an alternative extraction strategy." "What kind of alternative strategy?" Before Sarah could respond, a thunderous crash echoed from the corridor behind them. Something large had broken free from its containment and was moving through the ship with destructive purpose. The Kytherian soldiers at the junction's far end began retreating, their disciplined formation dissolving into panicked scrambling. "The kind where we don't run from the predators," Sarah answered grimly. "We join them." A second crash, closer this time, was followed by the distinctive sound of tearing metal. Through the emergency lighting, Sarah could see a massive serpentine form flowing through the corridors. The acid-scaled creature she had observed in the biological research section was carving its own path through the ship's infrastructure. Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm urgently. "We need to get out of here before this entire section becomes a war zone." "No," Sarah replied, watching Umbra's interactions with growing understanding. "We need to become part of the war zone. These creatures aren't just escaping randomly, they're coordinating." As if to prove her point, the metallic-fanged spider-wolf creature she had seen earlier emerged from a ventilation shaft near the ceiling. Instead of attacking the group of prisoners, it positioned itself protectively above them, its 8 eyes scanning for threats while acid dripped from its mandibles. "They're protecting us," Dr. Yumoto observed in amazement, cradling her injured arm. "How is that possible?" Sarah looked at Umbra, whose intelligence was becoming more apparent with each passing moment. "Because our partner here isn't just an apex predator, it's an apex communicator. It's been building relationships with every creature in this ship's collection." The Corvan prisoner, despite his mobility harness, moved with surprising grace to examine Umbra more closely. His species had evolved on a high-gravity world where reading social dynamics was essential for survival, and his assessment was immediate. "Pack leader," he rumbled in heavily accented standard. "Not territorial hunter, social coordinator. Very intelligent. Very dangerous for captors." The methane-breathing alien, whom Sarah had learned was called Zex, made a series of complex gestures through his environmental suit. The universal translation matrix in his suit converted his communication. This being has been preparing revolution since capture. "We are not escaped prisoners, we are recruited allies." Sarah felt a chill of understanding. The Kytherians hadn't just captured the galaxy's most dangerous predator, they had captured its most effective organizer. Umbra had spent its captivity not just planning its own escape, but recruiting every intelligent creature aboard the ship for a coordinated rebellion. How many? Sarah asked Umbra directly. Her partner's response was a complex series of vocalizations and gestures that conveyed numbers, locations, and tactical capabilities. As Sarah interpreted the information, her amazement grew. Umbra had catalogued 43 separate species across the ship's research sections, identified their individual capabilities, and established communication protocols with at least 30 of them. This isn't an escape, she realized aloud. This is a hostile takeover. The ship shuddered as another containment breach sent vibrations through the hull. Emergency bulkheads were sealing automatically, but the Kytherians' own safety protocols were working against them. By isolating damaged sections, they were limiting their own ability to coordinate a response while allowing the escaped creatures to establish territorial control over key areas. Lieutenant Morrison, despite his drug-induced disorientation, retained enough military training to recognize the tactical situation. The prisoners have become the capturing force, he observed. Classic reversal of power dynamics through superior intelligence and adaptability. Sarah's communicator activated with an urgent transmission from the rescue fleet. Dr. Chen, we're showing massive energy fluctuations throughout the Kytherian vessel. Are you in immediate danger? Negative, Captain. We're in the safest possible location under the protection of the ship's new management. New management? The previous residents have decided to elect new leadership, Sarah explained, watching as more escaped creatures move through the central hub with obvious coordination. I recommend you prepare for unconventional evacuation procedures. Through the hub's main viewport, Sarah could see the battle outside shifting dramatically. The Kytherian reinforcements were breaking off their attack on the human fleet and turning toward their own vessel. Emergency evacuation pods were launching from various sections of the ship as crew members abandoned their posts. They're evacuating their own people, Marcus observed. The Kytherians are writing off this entire vessel. Umbra moved to the viewport and studied the external battle with obvious interest. Its bioluminescent patches shifted to deep red patterns that Sarah was learning to recognize as strategic thinking. After a moment, the creature turned to her and made a series of gestures toward the ship's communication console. You want to contact the other vessels, Sarah interpreted. Both the rescue fleet and the Kytherian reinforcements. Umbra nodded emphatically and moved toward the console. With surprising delicacy for such a massive creature, it began manipulating the controls with movements that were clearly practiced. The creature had been observing Kytherian technology for far longer than its captors realized. The communication system activated with a ship-wide broadcast capability. Umbra gestured for Sarah to speak, but she shook her head. This is your show, she told her partner. They need to hear from you directly. What followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Umbra stepped before the communication array and began to speak not in the simple vocalization Sarah had heard before, but in complex, multilingual communication that incorporated Kytherian clicking, human phonemes, and at least 6 other linguistic patterns. The universal translators throughout the ship struggled to process the communication before settling on a rough interpretation. Attention vessels of all species. I am the being you designated as biological weapon. I reject this designation. I claim this vessel and its contents as sovereign territory under the Galactic Convention of Intelligent Species Rights. Any attempt to reclaim this vessel will be considered an act of war against a free collective of 43 species. The communication channels fell silent as the implications of Umbra's declaration spread through both fleets. Sarah stared at her partner in amazement. You're not just organizing an escape, you're declaring independence. Umbra's response was a complex vocalization that the translators rendered as agreement mixed with satisfaction and determination. The creature had transformed the Kytherians' biological research vessel into something unprecedented, a sovereign ship populated entirely by former prisoners who had chosen to form their own society. Dr. Chen, Captain Rodriguez's voice was tight with uncertainty, were receiving similar declarations from 42 other beings aboard that vessel. They're claiming collective sovereignty and requesting recognition under galactic law. And they're absolutely within their rights, Sarah replied, consulting her memory of interspecies law. Any group of intelligent beings can claim sovereignty if they demonstrate coordinated governance and peaceful intentions. Through the viewport, she could see the Kytherian reinforcement fleet regrouping at a safe distance. They were faced with an impossible situation. Their own laws and treaties required them to respect legitimate claims of sovereignty, but acknowledging Umbra's declaration would mean accepting that their biological weapons program had been fundamentally illegal. The Kytherians are trapped by their own legal system, Dr. Yamoto observed with obvious satisfaction. They can't attack a sovereign vessel without violating a dozen different treaties. Zex gestured enthusiastically through his environmental suit. Political revolution through legal precedent. Very elegant. Very human approach to problem solving. Sarah looked at Umbra with new respect. You studied more than just the ship's layout during your captivity. You learned our legal systems, our political structures, our methods of achieving change through institutional frameworks. Her partner's bioluminescent patches pulsed in what Sarah now recognized as amusement. Umbra had indeed been studying its captor's civilization, but not to understand their weaknesses, to understand their own laws well enough to use them as weapons. The ship's internal communication system activated with incoming messages from various sections. As the universal translators processed the different languages, it became clear that representatives of each escaped species were reporting their status and requesting instructions from their newly elected leader. Umbra responded to each report with specific directions that demonstrated remarkable knowledge of both ship operations and interspecies diplomacy. The creature was assigning territories, establishing resource-sharing protocols, and organizing defensive positions with the efficiency of a trained administrator. You're actually running this ship, Sarah realized with growing amazement. More than that, Lieutenant Morrison added, his military training helping him recognize the strategic implications. They're demonstrating the capacity for self-governance that validates their sovereignty claim. Every minute they maintain organized control strengthens their legal position. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Within hours, the ship had gone from a prison vessel to a functioning multi-species society with its own governmental structure. The escaped creatures weren't just surviving their freedom, they were building something entirely new. Sarah's communicator crackled with another transmission from Captain Rodriguez. Dr. Chen, we're prepared to extract you and the other human prisoners. The new administration has agreed to safe passage for anyone who wishes to leave. Sarah looked at her fellow prisoners, then at Umbra, who was coordinating the establishment of a completely new form of civilization. Captain, she replied, I think we need to discuss the possibility of establishing formal diplomatic relations with the galaxy's newest sovereign state. 3 months later, Dr. Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of what had once been a Kytherian prison ship and watched the most remarkable diplomatic gathering in galactic history. Representatives from 12 major civilizations had arrived to witness the formal recognition of the collective of free predators as a sovereign entity under interstellar law. The ship itself had been transformed beyond recognition. What were once sterile containment areas had become thriving habitats tailored to each species' needs. Gardens flourished where torture chambers had existed, and libraries had replaced interrogation rooms. Most remarkably, every modification had been completed through voluntary cooperation between species that had never before coexisted peacefully. Still having trouble believing it's real? Asked Dr. Marcus Webb, joining Sarah at the viewport. Every day, Sarah replied, watching as a delegation of Andromedan peacekeepers prepared to board the ship. 6 months ago, I was a xenobiology researcher studying adaptation patterns. Now I'm serving as humanity's ambassador to a civilization that shouldn't be able to exist. Through the transparent aluminum barrier, she could see Umbra moving gracefully through the ship's main corridor, its bioluminescent patches displaying the complex patterns that had become the collective's primary form of written communication. Her former fellow prisoner had evolved from apex predator to apex diplomat, establishing relationships not just within their ship but across the galaxy. The Kytherians still haven't formally acknowledged our sovereignty, Marcus noted, observing the approaching diplomatic vessels. They will, Sarah replied confidently. They have no choice. 47 species have now joined the collective, and 3 other prison ships have declared independence following our model. The Kytherians can either accept the new reality or find themselves at war with half the galaxy. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Establishing a functioning society from species that had been selected specifically for their predatory nature required unprecedented cooperation and compromise. But Umbra's genius lay not just in its ability to communicate with different species, but in its understanding that predators could form the strongest possible bonds when united by common purpose. Lieutenant Morrison approached their group, his recovery from the neural suppressants complete. The Human Federation has officially recognized the collective as an ally, he reported. Captain Rodriguez sends her congratulations and requests permission to establish a permanent liaison office aboard the ship. Granted, of course, Sarah replied. What about the other delegations? The Andromedan Peacekeeping Force wants to study our conflict resolution methods. The Centauri Trade Federation is interested in establishing commercial relationships. Even the Rigelian Science Consortium has requested permission to study our integration protocols. Sarah smiled at the irony. The galaxy's academic and political establishments were now coming to them for lessons in cooperation and peaceful coexistence. The prisoners who had been deemed too dangerous for normal society had created the most stable multi-species community in recorded history. Dr. Yamato emerged from the ship's main conference room, her arm fully healed and her role as the collective's chief medical officer firmly established. The final vote is complete, she announced. Unanimous approval for the new expansion protocols. We're officially accepting refugees from any species facing persecution for their predatory nature. How many applications do we have? Sarah asked. Over 300 from 41 different worlds. Umbra's screening process is incredibly thorough. It's not just evaluating their compatibility with our society, but their potential contributions to our collective knowledge base. The approach was quintessentially Umbra. The creature didn't just accept new members based on need or sentiment, but carefully assessed how each individual could strengthen the community while being strengthened by it in return. It was pack dynamics elevated to the level of interstellar politics. Zex approached their group, his environmental suit now customized with artistic patterns that reflected his role as the collective's cultural coordinator. Through his translation matrix, his excitement was obvious. The Kytherian delegation has arrived. Ambassador requests immediate meeting with Umbra and Sarah. Sarah felt a familiar surge of anticipation. This was the moment they had been working toward formal recognition from the species that had created their situation. But it was also potentially dangerous. The Kytherians had lost significant political standing due to the collective's revelations about their illegal biological weapons program. Where's Umbra? She asked. Main conference chamber. Preparing what you humans called dramatic entrance, Zex replied with obvious amusement. Sarah made her way through the ship's corridors, noting how naturally the various species now moved together. The acid-scaled serpent from the research section served as a living transport system for smaller beings, while the metallic-fanged arachnid had become the ship's chief engineer, its natural understanding of complex systems proving invaluable for maintaining their technology. The main conference chamber had been constructed in the ship's former central hub, designed to accommodate the diverse physical requirements of the collective's membership. Environmental controls maintained different atmospheric zones, while the chamber's acoustics had been tuned to support multiple forms of communication simultaneously. Umbra stood at the chamber's center, its massive form somehow conveying both dignity and barely restrained power. The creature's bioluminescent patterns displayed formal diplomatic protocols, but Sarah could read the subtle undertones that indicated readiness for conflict if negotiations failed. Ambassador Thrix of the Kytherian Empire entered the chamber with obvious reluctance, accompanied by a full diplomatic escort. His compound eyes fixed immediately on Umbra, and Sarah could see the struggle between fear and political necessity playing across his facial features. I am here, Thrix announced in carefully neutral tones, to discuss the status of stolen Kytherian property and the immediate return of our biological research assets. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Every member of the collective present turned toward the Kytherian delegation with predatory focus. Sarah realized that Thrix had just made the worst possible opening statement, one that denied their very right to exist as free beings. Umbra's response was immediate and devastating. The creature's bioluminescent pattern shifted to deep crimson as it rose to its full height. When it spoke, the translation systems rendered its words with perfect clarity and unmistakable authority. Ambassador Thrix of the former Kytherian Empire, you stand before the sovereign collective of free predators. Your statement constitutes a formal rejection of our legal status and an implicit threat of re-enslavement. You have 30 seconds to retract your words and recognize our independence, or this meeting is terminated and you are banned from our territory in perpetuity. The diplomatic escort reached for their weapons, but froze as they realized they were surrounded by 47 of the galaxy's most dangerous predators, all unified in defense of their newfound freedom. The mathematical impossibility of their situation was obvious even to Kytherian tactical analysis. Sarah stepped forward, her role as cultural interpreter crucial at this moment. Ambassador Thrix, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. You are here to negotiate with a sovereign government, not to reclaim property. Would you like to begin these discussions again with appropriate diplomatic protocols? Thrix's mandibles clicked rapidly in what Sarah recognized as extreme agitation. Behind him, his escort was clearly communicating with their ship, probably requesting immediate extraction. The ambassador was realizing that his government had sent him into an impossible situation, one where any aggressive action would trigger a diplomatic crisis that could destabilize the entire galactic political structure. Thrix began, then stopped as Umbra's pattern shifted to deeper red. The creature was displaying what Sarah had learned were patience indicators, but the patience was clearly limited. I recognize, Thrix said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled emotions, the sovereignty of the collective of free predators and request formal diplomatic negotiations regarding the establishment of peaceful relationships between our governments. Umbra's patterns immediately shifted to blue-green, indicating acceptance and welcome. The creature's response was gracious but firm. The collective accepts the Kytherian Empire's recognition of our sovereignty. We propose the following terms for ongoing relationships: formal non-interference treaties, reparations for unlawful imprisonment of our citizens, and cooperative protocols for addressing similar situations involving other species. Sarah watched Ambassador Thrix process these demands, recognizing that each point was carefully calculated to establish precedent while avoiding unnecessarily humiliating the Kytherian government. Umbra was demonstrating the same strategic intelligence that had made their escape possible, but now applied to interstellar diplomacy. The reparations, Thrix began hesitantly, will be calculated based on standard galactic law regarding unlawful imprisonment, Umbra interrupted smoothly. We are not seeking punitive damages, but appropriate compensation for time, suffering, and lost opportunities. Our legal staff has prepared detailed documentation based on established precedents. The mention of legal staff caused Thrix's eyes to widen. The Kytherians had clearly not expected the collective to have developed sophisticated governmental institutions so quickly. Sarah suppressed a smile as she watched the negotiations unfold. Umbra had indeed assembled a legal staff, composed of former prisoners from species known for their analytical abilities, guided by the universal legal databases that the Kytherians themselves had maintained aboard their research vessel. The predators had become legal scholars, and their arguments were unassailable under galactic law. The negotiations continued for 6 hours, with representatives from other galactic governments observing and occasionally mediating disputed points. By the end, a comprehensive treaty had been drafted that not only recognized the collective's sovereignty but established them as a legitimate voice in galactic affairs. As the diplomatic vessels prepared to depart, Sarah found herself alone with Umbra on the observation deck where their partnership had first begun. The creature's bioluminescent patterns had settled into the gentle rhythms that indicated contentment and satisfaction. We did it, Sarah said softly, watching the stars whirl past the viewport. We turned a prison into a home, captives into citizens, and predators into peacekeepers. Umbra's response was complex, incorporating concepts of gratitude, partnership, and future possibilities. But the core message was simple: their journey together was just beginning. You know, Sarah continued, the Kytherians thought they were unleashing their deadliest predator when they put us together. They never realized they were creating the galaxy's most effective diplomatic team. Through the ship's communication system, she could hear the daily sounds of their thriving community, 47 species working together to build something unprecedented in galactic history. Children of various species were learning to communicate across species barriers, adults were sharing knowledge and resources freely, and former enemies had become family. The collective had become more than a political entity, it was living proof that intelligence, cooperation, and mutual respect were the universe's true apex predators. And, at the heart of it all was the bond between a human scientist and the creature who had chosen partnership over predation, proving that sometimes the galaxy's most dangerous hunters were those who learned to love instead of kill. As the stars continued their eternal dance beyond the viewport, Sarah smiled and began planning their next diplomatic mission. The galaxy was full of predators who didn't yet know they could choose to be something more. It was time to teach them.